The chamber was so vast that clouds formed near its ceiling. Ambassador Thomas Reed stood alone in the center of a platform made of light, surrounded by darkness that stretched upward for what seemed like forever. Above him, arranged in thousands of ascending tiers, sat the representatives of 847 species. Some were beings of flesh and bone. Others were clouds of gas held together by magnetic fields. A few were pure energy, contained within crystal shells that pulsed with colors. Humans had no names for Dot. This was the grand adjudication hall of the Galactic Council. It floated in the space between three dying stars, built 10 million years ago by a species that had long since transcended physical form. No human had ever stood where Thomas now stood. No human had ever been judged by this assembly. Until today, the silence was absolute. 847 species, representing over 40,000 worlds, watched the lone human with expressions that ranged from curiosity to contempt to something that looked very much like fear. Thomas kept his hands steady at his sides. His heart beat at a measured pace, 64 times per minute. The Council's biometric systems displayed this information on screens throughout the chamber, and several species whispered among themselves. They had expected the human to show fear. They had expected elevated stress hormones, rapid breathing, the chemical signatures of terror. Instead, the human stood perfectly calm. High Arbiter Velox, an ancient being whose body was a constantly shifting geometric pattern, spoke in a voice that resonated through every mind in the chamber. Species designation: Homo sapiens. Classification: Deathworld Category 7 Predator Species. You have been summoned to answer for crimes against the Galactic Order. Thomas did not flinch. The charges are as follows, Velox continued. Unauthorized entry into protected space. Destruction of 14 military vessels belonging to the Krath hierarchy. Deployment of weapons classified as extinction-level threats. And the killing of 6,000 Krath warriors in direct violation of 17 Council treaties. The chamber erupted in noise. Clicking, hissing, telepathic broadcasts that felt like pressure against the skull. The Krath delegation, massive insectoid beings with armor-plated bodies and blade-like appendages, rose from their seats in fury. Their ambassador, a creature nearly 4 meters tall, pointed one of its cutting arms directly at Thomas. This Deathworlder must be destroyed, the Krath ambassador declared. His species must be quarantined. They are too dangerous to be allowed among civilized peoples. Thomas remained silent. Waiting. High Arbiter Velox restored order with a pulse of energy that silenced every being in the chamber. Ambassador Reed, you have heard the charges against your species. How do you answer? Thomas looked up. He made eye contact with each section of the assembly, a slow, deliberate scan that took nearly a full minute. Several species found this deeply unsettling. In most cultures, such direct eye contact was either a challenge or a threat. The human finally spoke. Honored Arbiter. Distinguished representatives of the Council. Humanity pleads guilty to every action described. The chamber fell silent again. But this time it was a different kind of silence. Confusion. No species in the history of the Council had ever simply admitted guilt to charges this severe. However, Thomas continued, before this Council passes judgment, I formally request that the evidence which prompted our response be presented to this assembly. The Krath ambassador clicked its mandibles in what the translators identified as mockery. The human attempts to delay justice. What evidence could possibly justify the slaughter of our warriors? Thomas turned to face the Krath directly. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. The Council's environmental systems detected subtle changes in his biochemistry. Adrenaline increasing, cortisol rising. In most species, these were signs of fear or submission. Human behavioral specialists would later explain that in their species, These chemicals indicated the activation of something far more dangerous than fear. "I request," Thomas said quietly, "that the Council play the signal that was broadcast into human space. The signal that brought our fleet to the Krath border. The signal that made every human who heard it willing to start a war." High Arbiter Velox hesitated. "The prosecution has not entered any signal into evidence." "No," Thomas agreed. "They have not. I wonder why." The Krath ambassador's mandibles stopped clicking. For the first time, the massive insectoid seemed uncertain. "Play the signal," Thomas repeated. "Let this council hear what was sent to Earth. Let them understand why humanity responded the way we did. And then, if you still believe we are the monsters in this story, judge us as you see fit." A murmur spread through the assembly. Representatives of hundreds of species consulted with their delegations. The Vesari, an ancient race known for their wisdom, requested that the evidence be produced. The Mindari Collective, beings who shared a single telepathic consciousness, seconded the request. High Arbiter Velox turned to the Krath delegation. "Does the prosecution have this signal in their records?" The Krath ambassador hesitated for too long. "We have it," a new voice said. Every being in the chamber turned. The speaker was a small, gray-skinned creature from a species called the Archivists. They were the record keepers of the galaxy, beings who stored every piece of information ever transmitted through Council space. "We have the signal," the Archivist repeated. "It was transmitted 18 standard days ago from a vessel in Krath-controlled space. The vessel's transponder identified it as the human ship Wandering Star, a civilian transport carrying refugees." "Play it," Thomas said. The Archivist looked to High Arbiter Velox, who nodded. What emerged from the chamber's translation systems was not a distress call. It was not a request for assistance. It was not a diplomatic communication. It was the sound of human children screaming. The sound filled the chamber for exactly 47 seconds. During those 47 seconds, the Council heard children crying for their parents. They heard a young voice, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, begging someone to stop. They heard the sounds of violence, of pain, of terror. And beneath it all, they heard the clicking laughter of Krath warriors. When the signal ended, the silence in the chamber was absolute. Thomas Reed's voice cut through it like a blade forged in the heart of a dying star. That signal came from a ship carrying 4,000 human refugees. 1,200 of them were children. The youngest was 3 months old. He paused, letting the number settle into 847 different minds. The Wandering Star was fleeing a Krath expansion campaign. They had been traveling for 2 years, looking for a world where they could rebuild their lives. They were unarmed. They were helpless. And when the Krath intercepted them, they sent this signal into space, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear them. Thomas turned to face the Krath ambassador directly. Someone did hear them. We heard them. And now, let me tell you exactly what happened when that signal reached human ears. The Krath ambassador took an involuntary step backward. In the upper tiers of the chamber, representatives of hundreds of species leaned forward in their seats. The story they were about to hear would change the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. It would teach them why Earth was classified as a death world, and it would show them what happens when you make human children scream. 18 days earlier, deep beneath the frozen surface of Earth's moon, Admiral Catherine Wells was reviewing patrol reports in the United Earth Defense Command Center. The facility was carved into solid rock, a maze of tunnels and chambers that housed the nerve center of humanity's military operations. Hundreds of officers worked at their stations, monitoring the borders of human space, tracking ship movements, analyzing threats that most Earth citizens never knew existed. It was a quiet night. The kind of night that made veterans nervous. Communications Officer Pavel Novak was the first to hear it. He was monitoring the emergency frequencies, a routine task that usually produced nothing but static and automated beacon signals. But at exactly 0347 hours, something different came through Dot at first. He thought it was interference, a malfunction in the translation systems. But then the sounds became clear, and the blood drained from his face. He removed his headset slowly, as if it had become something dangerous. Admiral Wells. Catherine looked up from her reports. She had served in the military for 32 years. She had fought in 3 conflicts, commanded ships in 6 different star systems, and buried more friends than she could count. She had heard every tone of voice that existed in military communication. She had never heard the tone in Novak's voice before. "Put it on speakers," she said. The sound filled the command center. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Fingers froze over keyboards. Conversations died mid-sentence. For 47 seconds, the sound of human children screaming echoed through the halls of humanity's most secure military installation. When it ended, no one moved. Admiral Wells spoke first, and her voice was something that would later be described in official reports as controlled fury. Origin point. Novak's hands were shaking as he worked his console. Sector 7G, Admiral. Deep in craft-controlled space. The ship's transponder identifies it as the Wandering Star, a civilian refugee vessel that departed from the Kepler colony 2 years ago. How many souls aboard? Manifest shows 4,216. Approximately 1,200 of those are children. Admiral Wells closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. When she opened them, something fundamental had changed in her expression. "Get me President Williams. Get me the Joint Chiefs. And get me Admiral Harrison and the Second Fleet." The calls went out immediately. Within 90 minutes, every senior military and political leader on Earth was connected via secure holographic conference. President Margaret Williams, a former surgeon who had spent 20 years saving lives before entering politics, listened to the signal in complete silence. When it ended, she spoke a single word: options. Admiral Wells responded. "The Second Fleet can reach the Krath border in 16 hours using emergency protocols. But, Madam President, that space is protected under 4 different Council treaties. If we enter without authorization, we will be in violation of interstellar law." How long to get authorization? Ambassador Thomas Reed, connected from the diplomatic station on Mars, shook his head. The standard Council emergency process takes a minimum of 72 hours. Even expedited channels would require at least 48. President Williams looked at the timestamp on the signal. It had been transmitted 6 hours ago. 6 hours during which those children had been in the hands of the Krath. What happens to them in 48 hours? No one answered. Everyone knew the Krath did not take prisoners. They took property. And they were known throughout the galaxy for what they did to the property they captured from their expansion campaigns. President Williams stood. "Admiral Wells, deploy the Second Fleet immediately. Full combat readiness. You are authorized to use any and all force necessary to recover our people." "Madam President, the Council will view this as an act of war against a member species." Then they should have built a faster process. The words hung in the air. Ambassador Reed, who would later repeat them to the Council itself, recorded them in his memory. "Admiral Harrison," President Williams continued, "you will command this operation personally. Your objective is simple: bring our people home. All of them." Admiral Marcus Harrison was 63 years old. He had commanded ships since before most of his crew were born. He had seen combat in places that official records would never acknowledge. And he had a daughter, 12 years old, who he had held in his arms just 3 days ago. "Understood, Madam President," he said. "We will bring them home or die trying." The Second Fleet launched within 6 hours. 38 warships, including 2 dreadnoughts, 8 carriers, and a vessel that officially did not exist. The U.E.'s Prometheus was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a weapons platform so advanced that even the Council's spy networks had failed to detect its construction. En route to Krath space, Admiral Harrison called his senior officers to the command bridge of his flagship, the U.E.'s Relentless. "I want everyone to understand what we are doing," he said. "We are about to violate interstellar law. We are about to enter the territory of a species that has been conquering worlds for 10,000 years. We are going to fight them with a fleet that is, on paper, significantly outmatched. And we are going to do it because 4,000 of our people are counting on us." He paused, looking at each officer in turn. "If anyone has doubts, speak now. There will be no shame in stepping back from this mission." Commander Lisa Okonkwo, captain of the destroyer UES Thunderbolt, spoke for all of them. "Sir, with respect, the only thing any of us doubts is whether 16 hours is fast enough." The fleet pushed their engines beyond recommended limits, 14 hours into the journey. They received an updated transmission from the wandering star. It was not a signal. It was a demand, broadcast on an open frequency by the Krath commander, who had intercepted the refugee ship. The Krath were not asking for credits or territory. They were not demanding political concessions or resource rights. They were demanding the refugees themselves, all 4,000 of them, as compensation for the insult of attempting to flee Krath expansion. And they had included video. Admiral Harrison watched the video alone in his quarters. When he emerged, his face was set in an expression that his crew had never seen before. "Communications, send a message to Krath Command." "What message, sir?" "Tell them we are coming. Tell them to release our people immediately. And tell them that if a single human has been harmed when we arrive, there will be no negotiation, no surrender, and no mercy." The message was sent. The Krath response was laughter. They had never encountered humans before. They did not understand what they had awakened. They would learn about 2 hours before the fleet reached Krath space. Admiral Harrison gave one final order. "Wake up the Prometheus. Full weapons activation. Authorization code Hellfire." Deep in the heart of the fleet, systems that had never been tested in combat began to power up. In somewhere in Krath-controlled space, the children of the wandering star waited for someone to save them. Someone was coming. The second fleet dropped out of faster than light, traveled directly into the heart of Krath-controlled space. What they found was worse than anything they had prepared for. The wandering star floated dead in the void, its hull torn open in a dozen places. Around it, arranged in a defensive formation, sat 14 Krath warships. These were heavy cruisers, each one bristling with weapons that had destroyed civilizations. Their dark hulls were decorated with the bones of conquered species, trophies taken from worlds that no longer existed. Commander Lisa Okonkwo was the first to complete a sensor sweep. Her voice came through the command channel, tight with controlled emotion. "Admiral, I am reading approximately 1,800 life signs aboard the wandering star. Another 2,000 distributed across the Krath vessels." Admiral Harrison did the math instantly. 4,216 refugees had been on that ship. The remaining 400? Okonkwo's response came after a long pause. "No life signs detected, sir. But I am reading biological material being ejected from the Krath flagship." The bridge of the Relentless went silent. Every officer understood what those words meant. Admiral Harrison's voice did not waver. "Hail the Krath commander." The view screen activated to show a creature that would give most species nightmares. Commander Vexer was massive, even by Krath standards. His armored body decorated with kill marks representing over 100 conquered worlds. His mandibles clicked in what humans would learn to recognize as cruel amusement. Human vessels. You have entered Krath's sovereign space without authorization. This is a violation of council law. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. Commander Vexer, you are holding human civilians. Release them immediately. The Krath commander's amusement intensified. These are not civilians. They are property. They fled from a Krath expansion territory without permission. They are being reclaimed, as is our right under the laws of conquest. They are human beings. They belong to no one. They belong to us. Vexer leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering with malice. As will your fleet when we are done with it. We have 14 heavy cruisers. You have 38 smaller vessels. The mathematics are simple. You cannot win. Admiral Harrison's response would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy. You are correct that mathematics is simple. Let me show you some human mathematics. He terminated the communication. On the bridge of the Relentless, Tactical Officer Commander David Obi was already working his console. Sir, standard Krath armament gives them approximately 40% more total firepower than our conventional weapons. And if we deploy the Prometheus? Obi hesitated. Sir, those weapons have never been used in combat. If we deploy them, every species in the galaxy will know what humanity is capable of. The Council may decide we are too dangerous to exist. Admiral Harrison looked at the tactical display, at the wandering star, broken and bleeding in space, at the escape pods that had been launched but captured, at the biological debris still being ejected from the Krath flagship. 400 people. Gone. He thought of his daughter, 12 years old, the same age as some of the children on that ship. Deploy the Prometheus. Authorization code Hellfire. Target their flagship first. I want Commander Vexer to understand exactly what he has awakened before he dies. The UE's Prometheus was not the largest ship in the fleet. It was not the most heavily armored. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary cruiser, perhaps slightly bulkier than its siblings. Inside, it was something else entirely. Human engineers had spent 50 years developing the weapons it carried. They had studied every conflict in human history. They had analyzed every way that humans had found to kill each other. And then they had applied that knowledge to technologies that most species believed were impossible. The Prometheus powered up, sensors across. The Krath fleet detected the energy spike. Commander Vexer, still confident in his numerical superiority, ordered his ships to raise shields and prepare for combat. He never got the chance to give another order. The first weapon fired was something human engineers called the gravity spike. It was a focused beam that compressed matter to neutron star, density in a space the size of a human fist. The beam struck the center of Vexer's flagship. For one instant, a tiny sun was born inside the ship. Then the compression field collapsed, and the resulting explosion vaporized everything within 3 kilometers. The entire engagement lasted 27 seconds. 3 Krath ships were destroyed by gravity spikes before they could react. 4 more were disabled by precision strikes that somehow destroyed their weapons and engines while leaving their life support intact. Admiral Harrison had given specific orders. Any vessel carrying human captives was to be disabled, not destroyed. The remaining 7 ships attempted a coordinated counterattack. The human fleet absorbed their assault. The UE's Thunderbolt took heavy damage to its starboard hull. The carrier UE's Normandy lost a fighter squadron when a Krath missile penetrated its hangar shields. 37 human crew members died in those strikes, but the humans did not stop. They did not retreat. They did not hesitate. The Prometheus deployed its second weapon system, something the engineers had nicknamed Hellfire. It was a plasma delivery system that burned at temperatures found only in the cores of young stars. The plasma could not be blocked by shields. It could not be absorbed by armor. It simply passed through everything and burned whatever was inside. 2 more Krath ships ceased to exist. The final 5 vessels attempted to surrender. Admiral Harrison accepted their surrender, but only after confirming that human captives were aboard. 20-7 seconds. 14 Krath heavy cruisers. 9 destroyed completely. 5 captured. The mathematics had changed. Admiral Harrison ordered boarding parties to every vessel carrying human survivors. Commander Okonkwo led the assault on the Krath flagship herself. The burning wreck that had once been Commander Vexer's command. What the boarding parties found in those ships would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Krath had been sorting the refugees. Adults in one section, children in another, the elderly and the very young. Those they classified as non-productive units had been scheduled for immediate disposal. The boarding parties found the disposal chambers. Some of them were not empty. Commander Okonkwo's report to Admiral Harrison consisted of 4 words: no Krath prisoners. Admiral Harrison did not question her decision. The rescue operation took 19 hours. Every surviving human was transferred to fleet vessels. Medical teams worked without rest, treating wounds that would scar more than just bodies. In the end, 3,847 of the original 4,216 refugees were recovered alive. 369 were not. Among the dead were 147 children. When the Second Fleet began its return journey, they left behind the wreckage of 14 Krath warships and a message beacon broadcasting on all frequencies. The message was simple. This is the United Earth Defense Command. These were our people. This is what happens when you take them. Let the galaxy remember. The Council received this message 49 hours before the Krath hierarchy filed formal charges against humanity. And somewhere on the Relentless, surrounded by rescued children who had finally stopped screaming, Admiral Harrison sat alone in his quarters and wept. Not for the Krath he had killed, for the ones he had been too late to save. The news of what humanity had done spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within 72 hours, every species that had access to interstellar communication knew the story. A young species from a Deathworld had entered protected space without authorization. They had engaged a military force that should have destroyed them. They had deployed weapons that the most advanced civilizations had believed were theoretical impossibilities, and they had won. The Krath hierarchy demanded immediate action. Their ambassador before the Council, a warrior named Threxus, who had personally overseen the conquest of 37 worlds, called for humanity's complete annihilation. They are too dangerous to exist, Threxus declared. They destroyed 14 of our heavy cruisers in less than 1 minute. They possess weapons that violate the fundamental laws of physics. If they are allowed to survive, they will eventually turn those weapons against every species in the galaxy. Many species agreed. The Vorthan Collective, a race of beings who reproduced by consuming other species, saw humanity as a threat to their expansion. The machinery of Delos, an artificial intelligence that controlled 7 star systems, calculated that humanity's existence reduced its long-term survival probability by 17%, but other species were more cautious. The Visari, ancient beings who had achieved space travel before most species had developed language, requested time to review the evidence. The Mindari, a telepathic collective that prided itself on understanding the motivations of other species, asked to interview the human survivors of the wandering star. The Council granted both requests. Ambassador Thomas Reed remained on the Council station throughout the deliberations. He was the only human permitted in Council space, and he was watched constantly by security forces They could have destroyed him with a thought. He did not seem concerned. In his quarters, he received a visitor, the Zessari elder, who had requested the evidence review. Her name was untranslatable into human language, but she had given Ambassador Reed permission to call her simply Elder. "I have reviewed your species history," she said. Her voice was like wind through crystal, beautiful and somehow sad. "You are a violent people. You have fought more wars among yourselves than most species fight in their entire existence." "We have," Reed agreed. "You have killed billions of your own kind. Over territory, over resources, over ideas. We have, and yet—" The elder's form shifted, patterns of light moving beneath her translucent skin. "When we examined the recordings from your fleet's engagement with the Krath, we found something unexpected." Reed waited. "Your ships targeted the Krath vessels with extraordinary precision. They destroyed weapons systems and engines while leaving life support intact on vessels carrying your captives. They accepted surrender from enemies who had been killing your children moments before. And when the battle was over, your medical teams treated wounded Krath prisoners alongside your own survivors. We are capable of mercy," Reed said, "even to those who show us none. That is not what I found unexpected." The elder moved closer, her ancient eyes studying the human with an intensity that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. "What I found unexpected was the speed of your response." Reed tilted his head slightly. "Your fleet traveled 16 hours at emergency speed to reach the Krath sector. Your government authorized the mission within 90 minutes of receiving the distress signal. Your entire species mobilized for war in less than a single day. Our children were screaming." Reed said simply, "Yes, and that is what I find remarkable." The elder's form pulsed with colors that human eyes could not fully perceive. Most species would have debated. They would have calculated costs and benefits. They would have sought diplomatic solutions or waited for council authorization. The process would have taken weeks, perhaps months. "Our children were screaming," Reed repeated. "You keep saying that as if it explains everything." "For humans, it does." The elder was silent for a long moment. Then she made a sound that might have been laughter, or might have been something else entirely. "I have lived for 7,000 years, Ambassador. I have watched species rise and fall. I have seen empires that spanned galaxies crumble into dust. And I have learned that the most dangerous species in the universe are not the strongest, or the most intelligent, or the most technologically advanced. What are the most dangerous species? The ones who will sacrifice everything for their young." The elder moved toward the door of Reed's quarters. "The council will vote tomorrow. I cannot tell you how the vote will go, but I can tell you this. When I cast my vote, I will remember the sound of your children screaming, and I will remember how fast you came to save them." She left without another word. The next day, the council convened for the final vote. The grand adjudication hall was filled to capacity. 847 species, representing every major power in the galaxy, had sent their most senior representatives. The fate of humanity would be decided in this chamber. High Arbiter Velox called the assembly to order. "The council has reviewed all evidence in the matter of human aggression against the Krath hierarchy. We have heard testimony from survivors, analyzed recordings of the engagement, and examined the weapons technology deployed by the human fleet." The chamber was silent. "The charges against humanity are as follows: unauthorized entry into protected space, destruction of military assets belonging to a council member species, deployment of weapons classified as extinction-level threats. The penalty for these charges, if humanity is found guilty, is quarantine or extinction." Ambassador Reed stood alone in the center of the hall, surrounded by species that could destroy Earth with a single vote. "Before we vote," Velox continued, "the accused has requested to make a final statement. Reed nodded and stepped forward. Distinguished representatives of the Council, I will not deny anything humanity has done. We violated your treaties. We destroyed the craft ships. We deployed weapons that you did not know we possessed. He paused, looking up at the assembled species. But before you vote to destroy us, I ask you to consider one thing. In your long histories, in your ancient civilizations, in all the millions of years you have existed among the stars, what would you have done if you heard the sound of your children screaming? The silence stretched. The craft took 4,000 of our people. They killed over 300 of them before we arrived. They were processing our children like cargo. And they laughed while they did it. Reed's voice hardened. We came for them. We fought for them. We died for them. And we would do it again. Not because we are monsters. Not because we seek conquest or domination. But because they were ours. And no power in this galaxy, no treaty, no law, no threat of extinction will ever stop us from protecting our own. He spread his hands. If that makes us too dangerous to exist, then vote to destroy us. But know that in doing so, you are telling every parent in the galaxy that their children do not matter. That laws and treaties are more important than innocent lives. That the screams of the young should be ignored if responding to them might upset the political order. Reed lowered his hands. I do not believe that is the galaxy you want to live in. I do not believe that is the message you want to send. And I do not believe, when you look into whatever passes for your hearts, that you would have done anything different if it had been your children screaming in the dark. He stepped back. The floor is yours. Arbiter, High Arbiter Velox looked out at the assembly. 847 species, representing the full complexity of galactic civilization, waited to cast their votes. The vote would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. The vote began with the most ancient species. The Thessari Elder rose first. Her translucent form glowed with soft light as she spoke. 7,000 years ago, my species faced a choice similar to the one before us today. A younger species had violated our borders, destroyed our ships, and killed our people. We voted to destroy them. We succeeded. And in the 10,000 years since, we have never stopped wondering if we made the right decision. She turned to face the assembly. The humans did not attack the Kroth for territory. They did not fight for resources or power. They fought for their children, for 4,000 souls who had no one else to save them. Her voice resonated through the chamber. I have lived long enough to know that species who fight for their young are not the ones we should fear. They are the ones we should hope will stand beside us when the darkness comes. The Thessari vote against condemnation. A murmur rippled through the assembly. The Thessari had not voted against condemnation in over 4,000 years. The Mindari Collective spoke next, their telepathic voice touching every mind in the chamber. We have touched the memories of the human survivors. We have felt what they felt when the Kroth took them. We have experienced the terror of the children as they were separated from their parents. The collective paused, and when they spoke again, there was something different in their voice, something that might have been emotion. We have also touched the memories of the human soldiers who rescued them. We felt their rage. We felt their determination. And we felt something else. Something that we have never encountered in any species we have examined. What did you feel? High Arbiter Velox asked. Love, the Mindari replied. Not the abstract love of ideology or species loyalty, but the specific individual love of parents for children. Of family for family. Every human soldier who fought in that battle was not fighting for humanity as a concept. They were fighting for specific faces, specific names, children they had never met, but whom they loved simply because those children were human. The collective's presence seemed to expand, filling the chamber. The Mindari have examined thousands of species. We have found this quality in only a handful. And in every case, those species went on to become not conquerors, but protectors. Guardians of the weak. Defenders of the innocent. The Mindari vote against condemnation. One by one, species cast their votes. The Vorthan Collective voted for condemnation. They are too dangerous, their representative hissed. Today they kill the Krath. Tomorrow they may kill us all. The machinery of Delosses voted for condemnation. Logic dictates that any species capable of such violence must eventually be contained. We vote for immediate quarantine. But as the votes continued, a pattern emerged. The younger species, the ones who had risen to power through conquest and expansion, voted against humanity. They saw in humans a threat to their ambitions. The older species, the ones who had served, ived by wisdom rather than warfare, voted differently. The archivists, keepers of galactic history, noted that humanity's response was consistent with the behavior of every species that had eventually become a stabilizing force in the galaxy. The navigators, beings who existed partially outside normal spacetime, observed that in every timeline they could perceive, humanity's survival led to greater galactic stability. The builders, a species that had constructed artificial worlds throughout the galaxy, pointed out that humanity's weapons technology, while dangerous, could be invaluable in defending against external threats. When the final vote was tallied, the result sent shockwaves through the chamber. 431 species voted against condemnation. 416 voted for it. Humanity had survived by 15 votes. High Arbiter Velox raised a limb for silence. The Council has reached its decision. Humanity is cleared of the most serious charges. However, there remain violations of Council law that cannot be ignored. Ambassador Reed nodded, waiting. Humanity will pay reparations for the destruction of Krath military assets. The amount will be calculated based on standard replacement costs. The Krath ambassador began to protest, but Velox silenced him. Additionally, the Council imposes the following sanction. Humanity's advanced weapons technology will be made available for study by the Council's scientific division. Any future deployment of extinction-level weapons must be reported to the Council within 24 hours. Reed considered this for a moment, then nodded. Humanity accepts these terms. Finally, Velox continued, the Council addresses the matter of the Krath. Hierarchy. The chamber fell silent. Evidence presented during these proceedings has revealed that the Krath regularly engage in the capture and exploitation of sentient beings from conquered territories. This practice violates 17 provisions of the Galactic Sentient Rights Charter. The Krath delegation shifted uneasily. The Krath hierarchy is hereby sanctioned. All territorial expansion is suspended indefinitely. Reparations will be paid to all species affected by Krath conquest, including humanity. And the Krath practice of treating sentient beings as property is declared illegal under Council law, effective immediately. The Krath ambassador rose in fury. This is outrageous. We are being punished for the actions of our victims. Velox's response was cold. You are being punished for making children scream, and for not understanding that some species will burn the galaxy down to make that screaming stop. The chamber erupted in noise, but the decision was final as the assembly dispersed. Ambassador Reed found himself surrounded by representatives from dozens of species. They wanted to talk, to learn, to understand the humans who had risked everything for 4,000 souls. The Vesari elder approached him one final time. You have won today, Ambassador, but you have also shown the galaxy what you are capable of. Some will fear you, some will hate you, and some will seek to destroy you before you grow any stronger. Reed nodded. We know, and yet you do not regret what you did. It was not a question. Reed thought of the children he had seen in the medical bay, the survivors of the wandering star. They had been terrified when the soldiers first arrived, unable to believe that rescue was real. But slowly, as they were carried to safety, as they were given food and water and medical care, they had begun to understand. Someone had come for them. Someone had heard them screaming and had moved the stars themselves to save them. "We would do it again," Reed said simply. "Every time. Without hesitation. Without regret." The elder made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter. "I believe you would. And that, Ambassador, is why your species will either save this galaxy or burn it to ash." She paused. "I find myself hoping it will be the former." She drifted away, leaving Reed alone in the emptying chamber. 6 months later, a distress call was detected on the edge of Council space. A small transport ship carrying refugees from a species that had been recently conquered by the Vorthan Collective. The refugees were primarily children, orphans whose parents had been killed in the invasion. The distress call went out on all frequencies. Within 8 hours, 3 human patrol ships arrived. They escorted the transport to safety, provided medical care, and eventually helped the refugees find a new home on a human colony world. When the Vorthan Collective protested this interference, in their internal affairs, the human response was simple. They were children. They were calling for help. We answered. The collective considered launching a military response. They examined their fleet strength, their weapons capabilities, their strategic position. Then they remembered the Kroth. They remembered 14 heavy cruisers, destroyed in 27 seconds. They remembered the sound that had triggered humanity's response, and they decided that perhaps, this time, they would let the children go. Across the galaxy, species began to notice a pattern. Wherever there were children in danger, wherever innocents were suffering, wherever the weak were being preyed upon by the strong, humans seemed to appear, not as conquerors, not as colonizers, not as the dominant force in some galactic empire, but as protectors, as guardians, as the species that would cross any distance, violate any treaty, fight any enemy, to answer the screams of the helpless. Some species called them dangerous, some called them reckless, but the children of the galaxy, the ones who had been saved by human hands, the ones who had learned that help would come if only they called loudly enough, they had a different name for the strange beings from the death world called Earth. They called them Hope. And in the darkness between the stars, where the screams of the innocent had once gone unanswered, that hope began to spread. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was just getting started.